Hello. Welcome everyone to our panel discussion on gender diversity and pride in tech. I wish a happy Transgender Day of Visibility to both my panelists and everyone watching at home or wherever you might be actually streaming this or watching it in post. Happy TDOV to y'all. As part of visibility, I have organized this panel to have an open discussion between a few members of our community in order to really open up those doors for empathy and understanding in a time that's as critical as it is now for the gender diverse and trans community. I wanted to extend an extra measure of gratitude to my panelists for submitting their time and cooperation today in having this discussion with me. I can't express the level of gratitude I have for y'all, as well as the level of respect that I have for y'all as my peers. Y'all are some of the most inspirational and coolest and talented people I know. So I am honored that y'all would show up to something like this. So thank you again. Thank anyone watching. Thank you to my panelists. And once again, this day allows us to really highlight what it means to be gender diverse in the world as a human. Here at Codeup, we are in a programmatic structure in order to really help people accelerate life change. One of those most valuable points is for people in the genderqueer community who might have a certain special way that they interact with the tech community. So that's what our discussion is going to highlight today. This opportunity gives us a really special way to celebrate the exceptional qualities that place transgender, non-cis, gender diverse individuals in the highest echelons of strength, courage, and determination. My name personally, for those of y'all who have not been introduced formally to me outside of our Codeup institution, my name is Madeline Stephanie Capper. I am one of the data science instructors here at Codeup, and I will allow my panelists to present themselves to y'all here as well.
Hi, so first, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Kristen Addington, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm the Senior Digital Solutions Manager at Whataburger. So I lead the team that creates the mobile app, Whataburger.com, and online ordering for Whataburger. The front end and back end are all developed in-house, and we have over 6 million users. So it's a lot of fun, and we do get down and dirty in the code.
Hi, I'm Micah June Culpepper, and my pronouns are she or they. And I started working in IT back in 2014 after going through the Open Cloud Academy, which I understand is now a part of Codeup. Started working at Rackspace, and then these days I'm working at Network to Code as a senior consultant. We do network automation.
Hi, thanks for inviting me here. I'm Vera Upton, she, her. I work as a developer, test engineer at Booz Allen Hamilton. We work on a lot of like military projects or things that needs to be done for government, or sometimes outside of that, but especially my work deals primarily with military and government. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all again so much for showing. So happy to have this discussion with y'all. So those of us in our community, in the gender diverse community, we are exceptionally and acutely aware of the tumult that we are facing societally right now, from government, from society, where be it. We are in a very challenged place right now, and this weighs very heavily on us. So thank you all again just for being here in that regard, in order to shed light and empathy and grace on our position as we are just humans, and furthermore, I think some of the most talented and inspirational ones out there. in this moment, as a result, I think it's really critical for us to lift each other up and celebrate the wealth of gifts that we have to offer in our own existence, right? I want to extend further thanks to anyone in the audience watching today in your solidarity and allyship for the sake of pride and acceptance for the trans community. Please listen to your genderqueer peers in the world. We are facing some pretty significant challenges right now, and I implore y'all to reach into your hearts for empathy and assisting us in being able to live our lives to our fullest. So thank y'all to anyone in the audience watching today. So to actually roll into this discussion here, I'm not sure if y'all have had the same experience, but there's a sort of stereotype or meme of the idea of the trans developer or tech member, right? There's seemingly a expectation if you tell someone that you're trans and a developer that it's like, oh, of course you are, right? We see this around ourselves colloquially, anecdotally. We see it presented in media, something like Radical Edward from Cowboy Bebop back in the day, anime, to anything from like the Matrix movies and the other Wachowski projects. Sense8, trans individuals are often depicted as working specifically in the tech field or having some relation to a cyber representation of themselves, right? It seems to be really tied into the social perception of our identity in the swarm of negative stereotypes that come into play when it comes to trans individuals in the media. This is one that is not necessarily good or bad, but is still present, right? And to me, hearing that and seeing that in the world, it rings of truth in some regard. And from my perception, it seems almost that it's correlated to this idea of tech and development, software creation, and technical aptitude being this space where both we have this ability to kind of transcend our physical presence, as well as find ourselves in a field where we can essentially prove ourselves by our own merit in a way that we might not with other fields, right? Someone might not feel exceptionally confident as a gender diverse individual in specific trades where they're presumed to meet expectations of gender conventions, right? Imagine if you were in the place of like a mechanic at an auto shop or somewhere that is highly gendered, right? The developer field and the tech field is a little bit more forgiving in that regard, in my experience, and a little bit more based on the performance of your work. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see this so often. Do you, in your own experience, feel that this is the case? Do you feel like there is a more merit-based structure to the tech field? And do you feel like that allows you a nuanced feeling of freedom and empowerment for the sake of being a gender diverse individual in the tech field? I'd love to know y'all's thoughts.
So for me, first off, like I think getting into tech was something that, you know, I could sort of escape from social life because that was sort of difficult for me. And so it was, you know, could just be me and my computer, learning how to write code, just, and there is that aspect of like, I can work through a problem and solve it and make something that actually works, you know, all on my own. And I think that does go into like our careers and how so it's very objective, the work we do, you know, there are objective standards, you can test the work we do, and so we can be measured objectively, and our skills can be measured that way as well. And so I think that both drew me to the tech field and was definitely something that helped when coming out and when transitioning to be accepted.
Absolutely.
So for me, I worked in IT before transitioning and before realizing that I was trans. So it wasn't like I chose the career because I was trans or because of anything related to my gender, but when I came out, I did feel like it was safe to do that at work and to continue in the career that I already had. And for me, part of the reason why I felt like encouraged to do that was that there were other trans people at my job that I knew and that I had like worked with before on tickets and stuff. And we had a Pride employee resource group that I was involved with, and my manager that I talked to about this first and before talking to anyone else was very supportive. So yeah, it did feel like a welcoming place. Um, and I know that not every job would feel that way. So it's definitely easy for me to just continue doing the career that I had already been building for a few years. Um, yeah.
For myself, I'd say, I mean, I think Kristen hit on something immediately of just like moving. It is something you can do that isn't necessarily inherently social. Being able to, code and interact with something online. Um, at least for me, I don't experience my gender doing that. I don't have to think about myself or my body. It's just the work that I'm doing. I kind of lose myself a little bit. And so it's very helpful for that aspect. I think it's a good way to just kind of disappear into my work that doesn't require me to think about myself or my body or anything along those lines. I think that there's also a touch of like because I didn't have to experience necessarily the same difficulties a cis woman might coming into the tech industry. I was, able to transition after I was already in it. So I already had that training and background that, encouraged into the field. And then I was able to, already in the field, transition into it. I think that's part of the reason of the stereotype. It's just like it allowed at least personally, I've had the advantage of not facing that misogyny going into it, and then able to transition already inside. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely resonate with all of that, certainly. I feel like my experience sits kind of halfway between what Kristen was describing and what Micah was describing, especially as well, where I was drawn to this type of work due to the fact of how objective and concrete the work is, right? It's very easy to be like, here, this is the work I did. I can literally hand you software that exists that is the work I did. And that's really nice, right? That's a feeling that you don't get from a lot of jobs, especially someone like myself who spent a lot of time previously in the service industry where proof of labor is very non-quantitative, right? There's no real way to measure the labor put out by a product output except for like how many drinks I made at a Starbucks when I was in my 20s, right? It's not the most concrete or satisfying way to explain like what your work has done. And I think that's what drew me into the field. But similarly to y'all's experiences as well, I got into tech before I had transitioned. Vera, as my former colleague at Booz Allen, when I was working as a data scientist there, saw me go through that explicitly, which presented its own difficulties, right? Consulting work is especially kind of a space between two worlds in that regard, right? Because while a lot of my work there was kind of siloed development work, as Vera was describing, we also had to interface with clients, and the idea of having to go to a client from the DoD one day and say, okay, perceive me as a woman now is extremely daunting, right? That's almost nearly as much as it is for any other industry. So I feel like I almost had like both worlds of the experience of coming out in the tech field in that regard, right? In some regards, the work itself was very quantitative, and I was able to show off what I've done very easily. On the other side of the coin, I was having to interface with probably the most potentially toxic masculine category of individual you could interface with, right? Like high-ranking military officials. Fantastic, love that for me. But granted, it all worked out quite well, and I didn't have any real significant struggles in that regard. So that was my experience kind of bordering those two worlds there. I don't think that I got into tech due to my transness either. I don't feel like it interplayed as a factor when I chose this field as far as the way that interfacing with tech allows me to interface with my personality or my gender. I don't think it was really related, but it is, however, awfully convenient to be in a field where my work is easily quantifiable, which I am very appreciative of. Kind of piggybacking off of that, there's the other side of that experience of kind of like what Vera was suggesting when she was talking about the idea of not needing to address yourself or your gender when you're inside of code or doing anything like that. The other side of that is that we've seen in media the idea that being in online spaces before being out is this place of refuge for individuals like us, right? A place that's offered safety and in a capacity to separate yourself through hardware or software or both in order to present yourself as the way that you would ideally like to be seen, right? We hear this like the fantastic song work of the very talented and sadly late Sophie with the song Face Shopping, if anyone has heard that before. The idea of presenting yourself in the digital space versus the physical realm, right? Which is, generally speaking, inherently more challenging for us as trans individuals who are placed into a body that doesn't really fit, generally speaking, what we would ideally want, right? That we have to face within our own situation. So I would love to know if y'all have had an experience like this, right? If you had the experience of really experimenting with your gender presentation through a digital realm before you were comfortable enough with getting into the physical space with that. And furthermore, kind of going forward into that, how do you think that that is going to play out in the future as we talk more and more about spaces like the so-called metaverse that our proprietors of the Facebook and MetaCorp would like us to be working in the near future? Do you think that once we're in a completely digital space, if we do find ourselves working on going from the Zoom norm of working to this even more highly digitized space, where we might not even be interfacing with our physical form, do you think that's going to really decimate the idea of gender binary? Is being like a binary trans person going to be like old and cliche at that point, right? Is everyone going to just effectively be a non-gendered digital construct, right? I'd love to know y'all's both past experiences with that and what you think might come of that in the future.
So I've been in the tech industry for about 22 years, and I transitioned about 3 years ago, but ever since the first time I got on a computer, I was presenting myself as female online. It was like a relief, and it felt like at the time the only way I could express myself in that way. And so I would meet other trans people, because I didn't know of any trans people in my area. I didn't, when I was young, I thought I was the only trans person in San Antonio. I thought it was that rare. So definitely had that experience. But in terms of like virtual reality, that was sort of like what I considered to be my only hope of ever sort of experiencing life as a woman. And that was if somehow virtual reality got to a point where it was realistic enough I could experience that, because I thought there was no hope of transition for me. But now that I actually have transitioned, that doesn't interest me anymore. I like it. I do like VR, but it's not specifically for that purpose. And so I feel like as society becomes, we're talking about the future, as society becomes more accepting towards trans people, people are more, they feel like they're able to share their gender identity. I feel like that's going to decrease, that dissonance between the real life and the online life, because people are going to be able to share their true selves in real life.
I was playing a female character on Final Fantasy XIV for a long time before I came out. It took me a while. It took me a while to put two and two together, but I think that there's a lot of stigma right now around being trans. It's like kind of a big deal if you are. When I came out, my partner had opinions about that. My family had opinions about that, and luckily my workplace was pretty cool. My friends had opinions. It's a whole thing when you come out, and I ideally think that it shouldn't have to be. I don't think that people having to adhere to fixed gender identities and expressions throughout their life is really healthy for anyone. And if we move to online spaces where it's easy to change that, I think that that might be a good thing for everyone to have a space to experiment with that type of thing. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you are trans or that you're going to change the way that you look in real life forever, to just maybe like try a different gender on your avatar one day. And I think that making it really easy to change those sorts of things and making it like a normal thing that people do is great. And I think that it helps to destigmatize being trans. I think that it helps folks to see that it's just a normal part of life to like have to express yourself as a certain gender, and like sometimes you don't like the one that you've been doing and you want to change it. And it doesn't have to mean anything profound about your inner soul or something. It can just be a thing that you like. Of course, for some people it is incredibly important. For me, it's incredibly important, but I don't think it should have to be. Although I will say that I really don't hope that we do move everything to VR for other reasons. Like, I would hate having to report into work in a VR headset every day. That's unappealing to me for a lot of reasons, including just the fact that I'm autistic and I have a lot of sensory difficulties, and like having a VR headset on is a bad time, and I would hate to do that for work. But there are advantages to being in an online space like that, where it's where identity can be as fluid as it is in real life.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the experience of being presenting my gender online before in person, right? Like, I think it gives you, being virtual gives you the ability to experiment and play with gender in a way that you can't in your body and in your person. And so I definitely did that. I definitely resonate with that experience. I think that as work becomes increasingly virtual, I think it will be a more comfortable place for trans people. I don't think that anytime in the near future we're going to see an abolishment of gender just because we've moved things virtual. I think gender is an idea that's taken a little bit too strong a hold on our current population. And even if everyone is all virtual penguins, they'll still put pink hats on or whatever and genderize it. Like I think especially even as people who feel gendered themselves move into virtual spaces, they will find a way to genderize that virtual avatar too.
Yeah, I almost feel like an outlier in my experience in that I feel like I really didn't present myself feminine in the digital space before. I feel like my interactions with gender were almost always purely physical and like related to my experience in my body growing up. I think from a very young age, I was cognizant of that, and I attempted to tune that within the standard acceptable gender presentation, right? But I didn't really try to translate that into the online space because it seemed like I think there's a barrier of like an idea of like wish fulfillment that felt falsified from it at me. So I didn't really explore myself that way in that regard, but like instead from a very early age when I was expected to present masculine was still, actively shaving all of my body hair, and I've never had a beard in a day of my life. That's like just the way that I've always expressed myself in my body. And I think I kind of just continued that path eventually until I hit a wall of being like, well, you're going to have to tell some people some things if you go any further than this. And realized in my adulthood that yes, I can't avoid that actually. So I was put against that wall and realized that I had to face that. Kind of harkening back to something that Micah was saying too, I think it's worth shedding a light on for anyone who might be watching that isn't exceptionally familiar with the idea of the trans experience to think about. The idea of coming out as a gender diverse individual is radically different from the idea of coming out as just a gay or bi or lesbian or queer individual in general, because I think people don't realize that you essentially have to come out again and again and again to everyone you interface in your life. You have to come out to your job, you have to come out to your family, you have to come out to your bank to let them know that your name's different now. It's everything, right? Like it gets exhausting to have to be out as a trans individual because you have to tell every person that you might interface with again and again about how you're trans, right? It's exceptionally exhausting. And I think that the hope with being in a more digital forward age going forward, I also completely concur with the idea of going to work with a VR sounds exceptionally dystopian to me. Like that sounds like everything that was wrong about the Ready Player One universe, right? That the idea of people just living in shambles and escaping things, right? Which is not what I want. I feel like that is going to focus away on what things that actually need to change actively in the world, right? I'm not a fan of going that far with it. However, I do think that Band-Aid is going to lift up a little bit. I am very optimistic about the younger generations and their capacity to play with gender fluidity and to be able to express themselves in a way that feels more natural and less societally oppressive, right? To hopefully not be in a space where that we have experienced in that going through that process of going through the fire again and again and again, instead of just being able to have a kind of more universal online presence that literally is not attached to anything specific, that gives people the opportunity to play with things and express themselves however is appropriate for them, right? I think the idea of gender expression is going to change more than anything else, right? I think that the idea of what it means to be assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth is going to effectively change a lot, right? I think that's going to be liberating both for younger people that might experience any level of gender fluidity, as well as anyone who is in the intersex community as well, right? I feel like, unfortunately, our intersex siblings are often ignored in our plight when they are the ones who are facing assigned whatever at birth due to whatever they're perceived to be, when often they are literally neither, like biologically and physically speaking, right? I would hope that things are going to get a lot easier for individuals that are of that subset as well. Going more to the work field space again, I'm not sure if any of us are in this category, but Have any of y'all worked in a non-technical line of work as a genderqueer individual, or did you come out strictly in your current role or tech sphere? And furthermore, if you did or did not, regardless of that, have you noticed anything different being on the other side of the fence versus the way that your interactions go with your peers or with your clients or whoever you interface with at work? Do you feel that your presentation, your authority, your diction is perceived differently? Or do you find yourself tuning that specifically due to fear of being perceived a certain way?
So I have only ever worked in tech. I never had any other sort of job. The closest I came was I was invited to represent Whataburger at a STEM career fair. So I was talking to middle school kids about how you can get into STEM careers at places like Whataburger, places you wouldn't expect. And that was sort of frightening to be to talk to a bunch of strangers because I was very newly out. So I felt very safe in my tech job because these are people that I trust, people that I've solved problems with, and it was just my little team. So being out in the open was definitely like very scary for me. But the thing that made me decide to go through with it was thinking, what if there is a kid there who's trans? They could see me and think, okay, you can be successful and be trans. They don't have to be afraid of that, because I think that would have helped me as a kid to see that. But as far as like work being perceived differently, these days I do deal with a lot of vendors, and because we have all these integrations with different products, and they often assume that I'm just the project manager now, and that I don't know anything tech. And so they will specifically direct technical questions to the men in the room, or they will tell me, like, I'll ask for API documentation and they'll say, sure, you'll just need to send that to your developers so they can, understand it. And I don't really correct them. I think it's sort of funny. But yeah, I've noticed that difference.
So I haven't gotten confused for a project manager yet, but I would love it if that happened sometime. I just think that would be very entertaining for me personally. I've worked in tech since coming out and since before that. So I haven't experienced this in a different context. And I know that we were all talking earlier about how nice it is to have a tech job where you can do your job in a literal closet and turn in your results when you're done and have things like measured objectively. However, that's not the whole story, is it? Because perception is reality. It doesn't necessarily matter if you wrote really good software. You also have to make people think that you wrote good software, which is in some ways more important. So I feel like that is slightly more difficult now. I do feel I feel a lot of pressure to not only like conform to female gender stereotypes so that people will not hassle me, and also to sort of be a good representative of the community, because I know that for a lot of folks, I might be the only trans person that they work with, or perhaps even the only trans person they know. And I'm just like this, okay? Like, this is my work headset. And I sometimes feel a little uncomfortable about doing that in front of clients. But Madeline told me that I should anyway, so I do. But honestly, no, like most of the time at work, I have my camera turned off and I'm on conference calls with the customer and it's just all voice. And I there's a lot of days where I just don't feel like I'm doing all of the things that I'm supposed to be doing to like be gendered as fully female, which is a little absurd because I don't even think that about myself. I'm gender fluid and non-binary and all these other things. But yeah, it does make it feel weird when we're at the end of a sprint and we're all going over the stuff that we did in that sprint and giving our presentations, to have to be the only person in the room who is not male, and trying to just explain what I did from a technical standpoint and make it sound good and make people like me and be impressed with my work.
Yeah, I did come out in the tech field, but so I'm not really in any other field. I guess I kind of am. I do some tutoring on the side, and it's like SAT tutoring for high schoolers. It's like not related to tech at all, particularly. It's all online. It is, you know, with a camera and stuff like that, and it's been fine. It's been great. I think that's I think that would have been a normal opportunity for me to like have faced potentially some backlash or something along those lines, but my students, all my clients, you know, have been fully accepting and kind. And so, and you know, at my work in tech, you know, my team has been, you know, very good and kind, you know. So luckily, I think, at least in my experience, there hasn't been too much of a distinction between tech and non-tech, in terms of like very visible, like transphobia or something along those lines. For the more subtle things, there are, you know, very few female developers where I work, and I work with both military and civilians, like actually on base. I don't work from home, and you know, so there's almost the gender presentations are very interesting because there's people in uniforms, you know, male and female, and they have their own dress codes, but it's very it's very similar, I guess. And then there's the civilians and contractors, and they can dress how they like. And so I kind of feel like my presentation is what I make of it, you know, and because I'm, you know, I'm kind of, there's no dress code and I'm kind of making up the rules up as I go. And that's been both good and horrifying. And so, but so far I've been making it work. Yeah.
That's really interesting, right? I was thinking about that a bit in my own experiences as y'all were talking. It's kind of a coalescence, because very similar to what you were speaking to earlier, Kristen. Like I did not know of another trans individual growing up. I literally have no one in my extended family that is even queer in any sense, as far as I was aware. These were very like isolated and unique feelings and experiences for myself, right? So I when I came out, didn't even know what was to be expected of how someone would interact with a trans individual. So I was going in completely blind in that regard, and not even really knowing what to anticipate, what to note of differences. Are people going to speak down to me because I'm being perceived as a woman, or are they going to potentially speak down to me because they perceive me as being a trans individual, or are they going to treat me exactly the same? I had no idea what was going to come of that. And by and large, I feel like the changes from my end haven't been on the outside, but the internal disparity has been significant. My pressure on myself to elevate my presentation and my work has drastically increased, because I think that barrier of being, in my case, what was being perceived as a white male individual in the tech field was like, that's life on easy mode, right? And suddenly I wasn't in life on easy anymore. I decided to go into New Game Plus on super difficulty because I'm an idiot. So I proceeded to go into that field not knowing how that was going to go forward. And to this day, I still don't even really think I can capture those differences in the way that I interact with individuals. But internally, I know, like, I have this precipice in my mind now where I'm like, if you screw up, people are going to think you're a real idiot now, where before they probably wouldn't even think twice about it. And that's probably completely imaginary, and people are probably thinking I'm as much of an idiot as I've ever been. But that level of barrier is still like really heinous now in my life. And I'm sure that like this is an experience that's only unique to me because I was living on this easy white guy mode for so long of my life. I know that other beleaguered communities and minorities have had to deal with that for every interaction of their entire life, right? And that's a one side of the fence thing as well, right? Of just never really fully knowing how people are treating you differently if you've only experienced it one way. I think that we're really blessed in that regard in our transness in order to have some type of semblance or taste of life experience on different sides of the fence. I think that's something that makes us exceptionally powerful in society in order to navigate the world, because we have inherently had to experience the world in different ways, right? I think that's something that's really beautiful about being a trans individual, despite its challenges. I think that's one of the things that make us such a cool and powerful group of individuals. Bouncing into the next thing, hopefully feel free to dismiss this if this is by any means distressing to any of y'all, but I did want to kind of spotlight this idea in relation to that. When Micah specifically was talking about the idea of not being on cam too, that really fed well in my mind into this next idea. Anyone watching in the audience that is not familiar exceptionally with the trans experience, often the clinical diagnosis of what we experience in most cases is called gender dysphoria. And that's the idea of the dissonance between your presence physically as you are perceived versus what is expected society, right? And granted, this is not something that is required of the trans experience. There are plenty of trans and genderqueer individuals that don't experience gender dysphoria. However, it is like generally the clinical common diagnosis that allows us to be able to seek treatment. And it is something that I personally experience on a day-to-day basis. So if y'all are comfortable with addressing it, and if you do experience gender dysphoria, I would like to know how that plays into that idea too. Does that play into the same way that I was discussing regarding presentation? Do you find yourself putting different focuses in your mind on the way that you present yourself? Do you find yourself having to do different tasks in your day-to-day to compensate for that feeling? Or what type of personal taxation do you find on yourself in the experience of navigating the world with potential gender dysphoria as you may or may not experience it?
So for me, I might be weird, but I have my main dysphoria is around my voice. And so I feel like I absolutely have to be on camera. If I'm going to be in a meeting, if I'm talking to someone, they need to see me and not just hear me. And so if, you know, conference calls are very distressing for me if it's just like on the phone. So I'm really thankful for Zoom and webcams becoming a thing, because it's really interesting because my anxiety goes up to 10 if if I'm not on camera. So I do find myself in the morning, I have to get ready every morning. I have to feel like I have to look nice every morning. I can't just decide to go off camera one day because it's more distressing. That's the main thing I struggle with. Sometimes I would be in a meeting and I'm the only one on camera. And I talked to my boss about that, how it's distressing to not be on camera. And he told me that if he's ever in a meeting with me, he'll always go on camera too. So there's a couple people. And so I thought that was really nice of him.
I had the exact opposite conversation with my boss where I told him that I would like to not be on camera. And he was like, okay. But yeah, I mean, dysphoria, I have good days and bad days for sure. But there is a lot of work to try to mitigate that. And I think that having pronouns be a normal thing really helps with this. I don't know if my gender presentation is to the point where everyone who works with me meets me and immediately knows that I'm a woman. But I have my pronouns in my email signature and in my Slack status and everywhere. And at least at this new job where I've been out since I started the job, no one has misgendered me so far. Everyone has been very cool about it. And just that, like having that little indicator of like, hey, this is how to refer to me properly, and people have referred to me properly. And I think most folks are like want to be respectful, especially in a professional setting. And it's very reassuring to never have to worry about my coworkers misgendering me because they just don't. Now there's still like that doesn't fix everything because there's still my internal worrying about how they are perceiving me. And I don't think that's ever going to go away, but they are at least behaving professionally. And yeah, I think having pronouns in like email signatures or wherever you have your name professionally goes a long way towards helping make that a normal thing for everyone to do and for everyone to check.
Yeah, I definitely experienced gender dysphoria. I definitely spend a lot of time trying to avoid that, either in the sense of trying to, find different outlets and like get some relief, or, trying to get myself to just experience it less, hard to do, or just trying to make sure my presentation is exactly right or something along those lines. I definitely spend a lot of time on it. Sometimes I wonder if like, so yeah, it's definitely a big time sink. Sometimes I wonder if that time sink is, a lot of it I think is just like, this is stuff that just like cis women have to do too. It's just like, there's a certain level of like expectations that we hold in our society versus, different genders. But yeah, it definitely is something that I experience, spend a lot of time on. Even to the extent like, even if everyone else at my work is very kind and doing well, I will, it is an internal thing. It is a thing that I have to separate for myself. I think it was easier coming out during a pandemic a little bit because, so much was online, and then, we got to wear masks, which I found very helpful to hide half my face. But yeah, I don't know. Definitely something that can be a difficult thing. Yeah.
It's really fascinating to hear how differently everyone that's in a gender diverse place experiences the differences in their own dissonance, their own self-perception, right? Because we are inherently kind of solipsistic in the way that we go about life, and we can only know our own experience as our own experiences. We're the only one living in that bubble, right? So any dissonance that you have with your presentation reality is specific to your own experience inherently, right? I think that's really fascinating. I'm very much on the side of strong vocal dysphoria and less physical dysphoria. Generally speaking, I with Kristen would much rather be on cam than on a phone call. I feel like I did very little to no voice training, and like I kind of go all in on vocal fry, hoping that that makes me sound like femme, but like also like I am constantly aware of it, constantly. And I do a teaching role, right? So I am lecturing most days, and it's like on my mind just persistently. I think there is a sub voice in my head at all times going like, oh, that sounded kind of masked. Maybe you should tune that up a little bit. Maybe pitch up a little bit, girl. And that's like, that is an annoying voice to have to deal with in your head all the time, right? Like on the same token, there's also so many other things going on in my head in order to just be me and be perceived the way I want, that like, it's just one thing in a basket of things as well, right? Like, I've always loved cosmetics ever since I was little. It's a horrible habit to have because it's expensive and a money sink. But on the same token, I love cosmetics. They make me feel good. They make me feel sexy and powerful. It's great. But on the same token, because I do like cosmetics, I'm very acutely aware of my facial features, my presence physically. And I think that like most cis women wouldn't really understand the idea of being like, okay, cool, I want to go to the gym and work out. Let me put on a face to go do that so no one calls me sir on accident, right? Like things like that on a day-to-day basis are rough. And like, I remember the before times before I was out, and just like the idea of having to deal with the weight of like seeing yourself in a mirror. I know it's also not a universal experience, but just seeing myself in a photograph or in a mirror or anything by glance was like psychologically harmful in the moment, right? And thank God, like any dysphoria that I experience now is severely reduced compared to those days of like feeling that all the time, which was literally unbearable, right? Which is like what leads most of us to the point of publicly transitioning despite the difficulties, right? It's because there really isn't an option for most of us as it stands. We're getting close to the end of our time here, but I do want to pick y'all's brain a little bit about, on that note, what would you like our allies and peers in the cis world to know about our specific access to medical care and the services that are part of our experience and the importance of that? If you want to speak a little bit to that as well.
Sure. I kind of think about what you said earlier about having to constantly come out, because my doctor recently retired, and so I'm trying to find a new primary care doctor, and it's scary because like I feel like I'm having to come out to anybody that I talk to because I need to ask if they'll do HRT, why I'm going there, and just general like going to urgent care. Are they going to discriminate against me? Or when they ask me, about X-rays, if I'm pregnant, I have to come out. So those things are, it's kind of also like with your previous question, like the little extra thing, a little extra layer. Just going to the doctor is sort of a mentally taxing endeavor. So I don't know if cis people need to know that, but it's just been my experience that it's definitely more challenging than it used to be.
I absolutely love filling out forms at the doctor's office and there's a checkbox for male or female, how do you expect me to answer that? Is this a medical question? Is this a question about my state issued ID? Is this a question about like what I'm here to see you for? Is this a question about what my insurance knows about me? I don't know. It's just a checkbox. And also, I don't really quite fit into either of those boxes. So, anybody who maintains a form or a computer system or something where you have gender as like a question, I want you to know that trans people will give you whatever answer we think is going to cause you to not hassle us. And it may not be the answer that you were trying to get. I think CVS did this. You have to tell them your gender in order to get the COVID vaccine. And again, it's a checkbox. And what question are you trying to ask me? And yeah, like we'll straight up give you data that is useless to you before we will out ourselves. So that's fun, navigating a system that really has no concept of nuance when it comes to gender. Other than that, I mean, there's a lot of medical stuff that's part of transition that is either barely covered or not covered under insurance, or it really depends on which plan you have. And you know, like at a lot of workplaces, you don't have a choice as to your insurance provider. If you get health insurance at all, you might have a choice of a couple of different plans. But those are all going to be from the same insurance company and generally don't have any difference in them in terms of like which gender related services are covered or not. And so there are a lot of us that will literally switch jobs just so that we can get on an insurance plan that covers what we need it to cover. My workplace last year had a choice of a couple of different insurance companies, and now they don't. There's only one, and luckily, I think it's going to be okay for me. But it's pretty rough to be in a situation where you don't have that choice, and you have to worry about: am I literally just going to have to change my job so that I can get the medical things that I need covered?
Yeah, definitely agree that access for trans people to proper healthcare being so dependent on just what insurance companies are, want to provide is makes things very difficult. And yeah, I know a trans person who's changed jobs specifically to try to get into a job that has the right insurance company to have the right, services. And that's rough and super unnecessary. And trying to improve access for trans people to that kind of thing is important. I will say, on a similar but not medical thing, I think that it's super important to make it easy to change your name and gender legally without having to go through a whole rigmarole. It's been unnecessarily challenging, and definitely something that needs to be changed.
I have very similar experiences. I think these ones are more universal, right? Because they're often the hoops that we all have to jump through. I think that a lot of people don't realize the number of steps that we have to go through to receive gender care, that it's not often as easy as walking into a place and having someone understand your situation. I am lucky enough to be receiving gender-oriented surgery later on this year, and the process of organizing that has been exceptionally burdensome, right? Like having to go through medical professionals and therapists in order to say yet again, several years into my transition, that no, I'm mentally well, I'm just trans. Like that process is exceptionally burdensome on us, right? And there's a lot of room for improvement. But on the same token, those that would be afraid of youth that might be experiencing dysphoria or any type of gender experimentation, I think are often not nearly aware of the barrier for entry and gatekeeping that it takes to get to a place where you can receive gender treatment. A child isn't going to walk into a place with their parents and accidentally trans their gender and lamented years later, right? That's not how the process works. And this is why we have medical professionals in place for us to receive this care, right? The gatekeeping is rough, and these barriers can definitely be more fluid and permissible for us to receive the care that we need. But on the same token, the fear mongering that is in place regarding what type of care youth gets is daunting to try to break down and reason with and let people empathize with our case in order to understand what our existence is like, right? I know that certainly I didn't feel like I had access to gender care when I was young, and I could only imagine how my life experience would be different if I did think that I had access to that and that things would be okay. So we are just past one here. I do want to kind of go around with a couple more final thought questions for y'all. I would love to know if you were to recommend something to any non-cis, gender diverse, or trans individual looking into a prospective tech career, what would be your single recommendation for them? And furthermore, if you were to pick out a single idea to convey towards any cis-normative person that has very little knowledge of our community, what would you like them to know about the trans experience? I know those are both kind of heavy questions to try to summarize in a single thing, but.
So first off, when Micah said earlier about the questions of gender, so I had to fill out a form that said male, female, or transgender. Don't do that. And there was another one where I took my son to urgent care, and it said guardian, like for the guardian, it said guardian's gender at birth. Like, why do you need to know that? So I put female. Because like what Micah said, I'm going to do the thing where I feel like you're not going to harass me. So what was the question again?
What would you advise to someone that is not cis, that is looking at a prospective tech career?
Right. So I guess it's the same thing that people ask me. I guess I would tell them the same thing I ask anybody, or I tell anybody, is to create something first. Like, just get into it. Create an app. Create something that you can use, where you gain that passion, and I think that'll go a long way to. When people come in interview with me and they show me their passion projects, that really goes a long way for me in terms of like knowing that this isn't just a job for them. They really love this stuff, and makes me want to hire them.
As far as I guess, like, I guess I don't have, well, okay, so first of all, I know that I don't have as much useful advice about how to get into a technical career as I would like, because I have tried to help several people get jobs in the technical field and it didn't work. So finding a job is always fun. But I will say specifically about the trans part of my experience, something that I realized when I decided to come out at work was, and this might if you haven't thought this through, this might help put your mind at ease. You don't need all of your coworkers to understand your gender identity. You just need them to have the information that they need to treat you like professionally and respectfully. So in my case, when I came out to my coworkers, I told them my new pronouns. That was about it. And I was like, if you have like more personal questions, you can ask me. And then none of them did. So I think there's sometimes a perception that everyone else is always going to think that it's a big deal that you're trans. And a lot of times they don't. Like, they just need you to tell them how to refer to you.
I think my advice to non-cis people trying to get into tech is kind of similar to what you'd expect for anyone trying to get into tech. It's just like being flexible and like being able to learn. A lot of tech is you have to get onto a new project and you have to learn, a dozen new things just to understand what everyone else is doing and get the ball rolling. And that continues to be the case, as far as I can tell, forever. That the industry keeps changing. You have to keep learning new things, and you always have to be flexible and willing to learn. And that's both a lesson for tech, but also, especially if you're not cis, a lesson for your own thing, right? You need to be able to handle that in your own personal life, be able to deal with people. And just a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of resilience is important to be able to handle all that. So good luck.
All great words of advice. I think that my personal recommendation is don't be afraid to reach out to people, even if you're insecure about your own presentation. Generally speaking, people are very open to have a coffee, whether that's virtual or in person, and talk about their experience, right? So much of the tech field, as with any other field, comes down for opportunities via networking, right? And it can be really hard for, I know, young people, especially that might be newly out or might be closeted and not sure what their future is going to look like in that regard for gender presentation. But actually reaching out to people and having conversations will pay extreme dividends. And furthermore, we are out here, right? Anyone who feels like they're going to be alone in the field, you're not. And furthermore, to anyone that might come across this broadcast in any one way or form that is closeted or young and not sure about their gender, I want to reassure you that we are out here, we are living our lives, we are thriving, and that your experience is valid, and as is your feelings. I think I am going to end it on that note. I want to thank Codeup for hosting this panel. I want to thank my panelists, Kristen, Micah, Vera. Thank you guys so much for having this talk with me. I think it was really valuable. I feel honored that y'all showed up and had this conversation with me. And to everyone out there watching, then thank you so much for tuning in and hearing a little bit about our experiences, and a mild apology to not having any representation for the trans masculine community. I tried my best, but I was not able to arrange that for this particular event. But please know that there are trans masculine individuals in this field as well, that we just didn't happen to have anyone to speak to their experience in that regard on this particular occasion. So once again, thank y'all so much, and we will see you around. Happy Trans Day of Visibility.